Hey friends, Dan McKnight here, chairman and founder of BringOurTroopsHome.us and the director of the 107club.com. You know, sometimes people actually do say the quiet part out loud. Sometimes the entire established power and influence brokers whisper the truth, but secretly they want to shout it out from the rooftops. Sometimes they find a tool, a mouthpiece, a good boy who says the quiet part out loud, but in a sort of humble bravado. In the state of Kentucky, the legislature called the Adjutant General of the Kentucky National Guard to testify before a committee. One of the committee members of the Veterans, Military Affairs, and Public Protection Committee, Representative Candy Massaroni, who herself is a veteran, asked the general in essence, "We have a lot of guardsmen overseas involved in proxy wars. It doesn't seem like that is the role of the National Guard. When they join, they don't expect to be fighting in somebody else's proxy wars." The general, who refers to himself throughout his testimony as Hal Lamberton, takes the opportunity to interject his personal opinion while testifying as the highest-ranking military officer in the Kentucky National Guard. He sits at the table, flanked by another general who is also a uniformed guardsman and who is also sitting there acting in his official capacity, and they're both wearing their impressive uniforms with ribbons and medals and stars on the collar. And Hal, I'm going to call him that, seeing that he's testifying as good old chummy Hal and not as the adjutant general, he provides the quiet part that is generally only whispered.
The men and the women we've got joining the Guard today sincerely have the expectation they're going to deploy somewhere. It may be to the Middle East. It may be to the southwest border. It may be to some other type of ancillary dynamic end of the world, but they join with that expectation that the folks.
Actually, citizens join the National Guard believing they'll be given lawful orders by honorable men and women, and that if they're going to be deployed into war, it'll be because of the vote of their elected representatives in Congress, not by executive whim. An older generation of veterans such as myself and responsible legislators who took an oath to the U.S. Constitution ought to possess the wisdom to safekeep young 18-year-old signups who are gung-ho for adventure. When the National Guard is deployed domestically to enforce the laws of the Union or aid in a crisis, that is good. When the National Guard is deployed to stop an invasion at our southern border, that is good. When the National Guard is deployed overseas for routine training so that they can be the most experienced and ready for whatever comes our way, that is good. But when the National Guard is the easy button, and they're deployed into combat where their lives are at risk and they're meeting hostile forces or aiding in the peripheries of a foreign war, which puts them in danger of crossing the line into belligerent status, that should never occur without significant debate and a formal vote by Congress. It's our duty as citizens of the greatest society in the history of the world to temper our passion, our vigor, and the enthusiasm of our youth with the wisdom of foresight and the respect for our foundational principles that are enshrined in the Constitution, to which every veteran has sworn a blood oath. Great Uncle Hal, he continues, though.
And as you indicated, we do not call it a war, but two thoughts there as well. You know, I mentioned the NATO partnership a little bit ago, and that partnership is only as credible as the countries who join it will follow through on what they say they're going to do. And quite simply, I'm proud to say that I think we've held every partnered relationship, regardless if it was through the active duty force structure or the Guard force structure or the USAR force structure. So Hal Lamberton's belief is that that's a dynamic we need to maintain.
The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, does not supersede the United States Constitution, and any Article 5 obligations under that treaty do not take precedence before Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution. Our partners are fully aware of the structure of our alliance system, General. But he doesn't stop there. He continues demonstrating a lack of understanding when he offhandedly refers to the Defend the Guard Act as a euphemism. The Defend the Guard Act is not a euphemism. It will, in the literal sense, defend both the bodily integrity of the National Guard's men and the institutional integrity of the National Guard by keeping them out of undeclared, unconstitutional wars. The bill is direct, it's simple, it's actionable. What is a euphemism are the mealy-mouthed, deceptive words and doublespeak that politicians and the Pentagon engage in so that they don't have to use the word war. They don't want to use that word to describe what our soldiers are actually engaged in. Some examples. HAL and HAL-like mouthpieces say our National Guard isn't acting as an instrument of war by training and supplying foreign militaries. We're in a partnership. All right, HAL, we hear you. HAL and his pals, they say our National Guardsmen aren't fighting. They're engaged in kinetic action. That's a euphemism. And in General Hal Lamberton's testimony before the state legislature of Kentucky while serving in his official capacity said, our soldiers aren't being deployed into combat. They're being sent into some other type of ancillary dynamic at the end of the world. That, Hal, is a euphemism. The simplicity of the Defend the Guard Act represents the plain republicanism of our founding fathers, the delusion of the language and meaning as a tool by the modern administrative state, including the Pentagon, to remove oversight and accountability from the American people. General Lamberton says the viability of the Guard for being engaged in any sort of real-world operation is going to be significantly diminished if Defend the Guard acts. He says because of their engagement with what I'd call a real-world operation. I'm not quite sure what you mean there. Lamberton uses the description real-world operation to describe what the National Guard has done in the global war on terror, another euphemism, the occupation of Afghanistan, the invasion of Iraq, the ongoing war in Syria. They're all very real, and they're equally unconstitutional. Our opponents routinely admit they don't like Defend the Guard because it would work. If Congress votes to declare war, the National Guard's ability to participate in combat would not be diminished whatsoever, not one bit. Instead of using his position as the Kentucky Adjutant General to advise against a bill that would enforce federal law, General Lamberton ought to be using his position to advise the government to follow federal law. Or better yet, as a uniformed military officer, he shouldn't be weighing in on the lawmaking or legislative process, period, hard stop. And he certainly shouldn't be wearing his stars and ribbons as added gravitas for his own private narrative. But maybe it's not actually his narrative. Maybe somebody, good old Hal, is finally saying the quiet part out loud.
The viability of the Guard for being engaged in any sort of real-world operation is going to be significantly diminished.
The United States Constitution and its Article 1, Section 8 prescription is the highest law of the land. And neither General Lamberton, any of his pals, or anybody else gets to dismiss it as not viable or inconvenient. U.S. foreign policy must adhere to the law and to the tenets of a representative government. Our laws and tradition of separation of powers must not be bent and twisted and perverted to the benefit of the modern imperialists who reside permanently in Washington, D.C. The mindset of Lamberton and most of the Defend the Guard proponents is, how can we maintain a global military presence and conduct ongoing overseas operations with this bill in place? They conclude that they can't, so they oppose it. As a veteran and as a proud American citizen with an equal voice, I say that we must restore the Founding Fathers' vision of a humble, limited government, a republic. We must end our endless wars in the Middle East and Europe and Africa, and we must bring our troops home so that we can begin the process of fixing our country and putting America first. If America's interests are threatened, and if our treasure is to be buried in another foreign land, and if the threat is so real that we are willing to sacrifice the blood and the lives of our youth and their patriotic enthusiasm, then we call on the National Guard and we commit our full support to them. We honor the document, the idea, the foundation, the Constitution that every member of the military has sworn an oath to defend. Anything less from us, the beneficiaries of their sacrifice, is an insult to their service.